I came home that Tuesday expecting the kind of quiet routine that makes a long day feel tolerable. Sunlight trailed across the street. The air smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass, and I was already thinking about checking on my hedges, those deep green walls of pride that I had nurtured for 7 years. 7 years of watering every morning before work, trimming each line into perfect geometric rectangles, fertilizing them with care like they were living sculptures. They weren't just hedges. They were my identity, proof that I was the guy who actually practiced what he preached as the owner of a plant nursery in town. But when I turned into the driveway, my heart stalled. The hedges were gone, reduced to shattered stumps no taller than my knee, jagged like broken teeth shoved into the dirt. Piles of branches littered the sidewalk, leaves spilling into the street, and a landscaping truck sat waiting like some buzzard finishing off a carcass. 2 young workers bent over the pile, loading up 7 years of my life as though it was just yard waste. And standing above them, directing with her leather portfolio in hand, was Vivian Galloway. Vivian looked at me like she had just cut the ribbon at a grand demolition ceremony. She smiled that smug, calculated smile of hers and said, "Your hedges violated the 4-foot height restriction. Dylan, I sent you 3 notices, 3, you didn't respond." I stared at her, bewildered because I had never received a single notice. Not taped to my door, not in my mailbox, not in my email. Nothing. But arguing felt pointless. The evidence was in the truck, my hedges hacked down almost to the roots. I forced myself closer, every muscle tight, jaw clenched so hard I could feel it grind. The workers avoided my eyes. One dropped a heavy branch, and when he bent to pick it up, he muttered under his breath, "Sorry, man." A whisper, almost drowned by the sound of chainsaws still buzzing in my memory. Vivian ticked boxes on her clipboard like she was keeping score in some game. She didn't even watch me, didn't even care about the wreckage of what she had destroyed. The board voted unanimously, she continued, as if that made her cruelty righteous. The rules are the rules. Except what she didn't say was that she controlled the board. Over the past 2 years, she had pushed out every reasonable member one by one. They'd either resigned in frustration or been voted out through her manipulation, leaving behind nothing but yes men and puppets who nodded through her crusades. She wasn't enforcing rules, she was creating her own kingdom. I crouched near the base of the hedge line to see if anything had survived, and that's when I noticed it. Amid the torn roots and fresh sawdust lay a half-buried piece of metal. I brushed away the soil. My fingers froze on sharp embossed letters, property marker. Not just any piece of metal, but an official county boundary stake, complete with the county seal and registration number. I blinked twice, heart hammering, because suddenly this wasn't just vandalism, it was a crime. Destroying or tampering with one of those was a felony offense. I lifted the marker, turned it slowly in the sunlight, and held it up so Vivian could see. "Fascinating choice, Vivian," I said softly, my tone neutral, though satisfaction curled beneath my words. She flinched, or maybe just blinked too quickly. I couldn't be sure. "That's just an old property stake," she said quickly, voice wavering just slightly. The hedges were still in violation, but now there was a shift. The workers froze mid-motion, stepping back from the pile. One even raised his eyebrows at the marker, as if realizing they'd been roped into something far beyond their pay grade. Neighbors were gathering too. Mrs. Henderson 2 houses down recording with her phone. Mr. Patterson sipping his evening beer. The Johnsons pretending to check their mail but staring all the same. Even old Mrs. Chen wheeled herself onto her porch, eyes narrowed in interest. Everyone knew Vivian's reputation, how she measured grass with a ruler, fined people for 5-minute trash can delays, and obsessed over the color beige. This was a show they weren't going to miss. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of the destroyed hedge line, of the damaged marker surrounded by sawdust and chainsaw cuts, of Vivian herself with her clipboard standing over the carnage. She stepped back when she saw me documenting it. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Just documenting," I replied calmly. "For my records. You of all people should understand the importance of thorough records." Her lips tightened. I could see the mask of confidence cracking just slightly, a hairline fracture. But I remembered something Lucas, my neighbor and City Hall employee, had once told me. 3 years ago, Vivian lost a $20,000 lawsuit for moving a neighbor's fence without permission. The judge had scolded her for treating the HOA like her personal fiefdom. Clearly, she hadn't learned. I pocketed the marker and straightened. "I'll see you at the next meeting," I told her. I assume you'll want to discuss this violation of county property. For once, Vivian had no quick retort. Only silence. The queen of rules left speechless while neighbors whispered and filmed. I turned and walked back into my house, heart still racing but steadier now. Let her stand there with her piles of broken branches. She thought she'd humiliated me. She thought she'd broken me. What she didn't realize was she'd just handed me the rope to end her own reign, one broken property marker at a time. The next morning, I opened my front door at exactly 6:45 a.m. to find a neon yellow violation notice taped over the glass like it was meant to blind me. Whoever taped it must have been half demented, because they'd used enough duct tape to withstand a hurricane. The paper screamed with aggressive bold letters, "Immediate action required." My bleary eyes squinted as the first line sank in, $500 fine for failure to maintain approved landscaping. I almost laughed. My hedges had been butchered into stumps less than 24 hours ago, chainsawed to death under Vivian's watch, and now I was being fined for not having landscaping. The absurdity struck me so hard that I actually laughed out loud in my bathrobe, waking the birds. Somewhere across the street, I heard Henderson's screen door creak open. I'm pretty sure she was waiting to record my reaction again. I waved the notice theatrically in the air like a flag of war. By the time I had finished my coffee, Vivian was already at work spinning her truth. A new HOA newsletter hit every resident's inbox under the subject line, "Another violation successfully resolved." Attached were 2 photos. One showed my yard at maximum hedge height weeks earlier, framed to make it look like the hedges were devouring the street. The after photo displayed the wasteland left behind, stumps in cruel daylight photographed from the worst angle possible. She had laid the whole thing out like some kind of triumphant case study, a morality play where she was the enforcer of purity saving the community from non-compliance. And as icing on her little cake of propaganda, she included 3 dates supposedly showing when she sent me written notices, 3 separate violations ignored, as she called them, smug lines typed like commandments. Except I never received those notices. Not by certified mail, not by email, not taped to my door, not even shoved under a doormat. They didn't exist. So after rolling this absurdity around in my head, I made a decision. No more reactive sighs, no more clenched teeth in my living room. It was time to mount an evidence hunt of my own. I tore apart my digital inbox, scanning every folder including spam. Nothing. Searched HOA across my entire email account. Still nothing. The woman had fabricated the notices out of thin air, invented an entire narrative, then cut down living proof. She hadn't just played judge, jury, and executioner. She'd revised history with Photoshop. And she thought I'd just roll over. Pay the fine. Plant some bland, approved hedge off her little list of acceptable vegetation, included at the bottom of the violation notice. The list itself was laughable. 5 central casting shrubs that screamed dullness. Plants stripped of life, variety, color. They were what you planted when you wanted a neighborhood to look like identical shoeboxes in a catalog. No creativity, no care. Just control. At 9 a.m., I drove to City Hall, paperwork folder in my passenger seat. Lucas was already waiting at the clerk's desk with a different folder of his own, that sly grin curling his lip. "I did some digging after yesterday's show," he said, pulling out the first page. My stomach lifted when I saw it. A court document from 5 years ago. Vivian lost a $20,000 lawsuit, he explained. She moved someone's fence without permission, thought she'd bully them into compliance. The judge threw the book at her, called her actions unconscionable and a gross violation of property rights. He flipped a few pages for effect. She cried in court, Dylan, didn't help her. She still lost. I sat down hard on the nearby bench, disbelief washing into a smile. The queen of bylaws had already been dethroned once. Lucas leaned closer, dropping the real bomb. She's been using HOA funds to pay for her personal lawn care. Premium service every 2 weeks, 18 months straight. Paid out to Green Dreams Landscaping. Guess how much? I raised my eyebrows. He tapped the receipt line. Over $15,000. Neighbors complained of $50 fines for trash cans, and meanwhile she billed her rosebush trimming to the entire community. Theft, plain and simple. Then Lucas gave me the ace card. He unfolded a document straight from the city's website. Bright lettering across the top. Public Art Beautification Program. New initiative, Lucas explained, eyes twinkling. Any wall or frontage can apply for public art designation. Once it's approved and installed, The piece becomes city protected. HOA can't find you, can't remove it, can't interfere at all. And the city's so desperate, they're giving out grants up to 10 grand for projects that qualify. I read through the requirements. Submit plans, get approvals, install the art. That was it. And once it's up, your wall becomes untouchable. My heartbeat quickened as ideas sprouted in my mind like spring clovers. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Lucas asked, grin spreading. Yeah, I murmured, staring at those words, protected status. She thinks she erased my hedges. She doesn't realize she just gave me the canvas. Together, we pulled permit records, surveyed lines, and got certified copies of every document that tied her to trespass. Janet, the records clerk, pushed her glasses up her nose and looked at us over a pile of files. That HOA president again? She's in here almost every week trying to create rules that don't exist. Wanted us to regulate shades of beige last month. We told her 50 times that's not enforceable. She shook her head. Half the office hides when they see her coming. By the time I left City Hall, my folder bulged with ammunition. Survey maps proving the hedges had actually stood 2 feet inside my property line. Receipts showing her HOA theft. And a roadmap to transform her petty chainsaw stunt into something permanent. That evening, just before sunset, an HOA mass email landed in my inbox. Urgent emergency meeting tomorrow night. Written in all caps, dripping with fake gravitas. Vivian promised to present the degradation of standards to the whole neighborhood, specifically naming me as Exhibit A. She thought tomorrow I'd be the villain. Maybe she'd never sat across from someone who actually reads ordinances. Maybe she forgot I build things for a living. Either way, I smiled as I clicked the city's beautification link again. She cut my hedges. She trespassed on my land. She destroyed a property marker. But she'd also handed me something much sharper than pruned branches, a reason to build. And this time, it wasn't vegetation she'd be facing. It was cement, ordinance-approved, art-protected brick by Permanent Brick. The emergency HOA meeting felt less like a neighborhood gathering and more like the opening act of a trial. By the time I walked into the community center at 6:55, every folding chair was filled. Neighbors clustered in whispered groups, kids sitting cross-legged against walls as though even they sensed history was about to happen. The buzzing conversations all carried the same thread. This is about Dylan's hedges, but under that, there was electricity, a kind of itching anticipation like everyone smelled blood in the water. At the front stood Vivian, freshly pressed blazer, hair shellacked back like she was about to argue before the state senate instead of scolding her neighbors. She had set up a projector, screen glowing with a frozen slideshow title that read in bold letters, Case of Dylan Mercer's Violations. She tapped the microphone 3 times, each hollow thud echoing in the tense silence. Thank you all for attending this urgent emergency meeting, she began, tone dripping with faux concern. We are here to address the degradation of our community standards. Her lips curled faintly when she said my name. Mr. Mercer has repeatedly violated HOA regulations, refused correction, and forced this board to take firm action. She clicked the remote, and the first slide popped up, an enlarged photo of my hedges at their tallest, shot from some twisted angle that exaggerated their size. The crowd murmured. She clicked again. The next photo showed the stumps digitally edited with a sickly brown filter, making my yard appear scorched. This is what happens when one resident thinks the rules do not apply to them, she continued, voice rising like a preacher before an altar call. We sent him 3 notices, 3, without response. I sat there stone still, letting her empty righteousness swell until it began to sound shrill. Slide after slide passed, graphs showing acceptable hedge height versus Mercer's hedge height, fabricated timelines of warning notices, even doctored after photos that made my yard look like some kind of post-apocalyptic wasteland. She clicked with that smug rhythm, like each slide was a gavel hitting the table, more gasps, more whispers, and then I stood. Excuse me, Vivian, I said clearly, voice carrying. Could you show us proof of delivery for those notices? Certified mail receipts? Email confirmations? Anything? Her clicker froze midair. She fumbled with it, accidentally clicking backward through slides like retreating steps. This isn't a court of law, she said finally, her voice brittle. We don't need to provide that kind of paperwork here. Lucas rose beside me like a second blade drawn. He held up a copy of the HOA bylaws like scripture. Actually, Vivian, Section 12, Paragraph 4 specifically requires documented notification before fines or actions are valid. Proof of delivery in writing. Otherwise, this entire action is void. His tone was measured, professional, devastating. The ripple that moved through the room was instant. Heads turned. People whispered. A voice from the back shouted, "Show us the proof, Vivian!" More joined in. Neighbors she'd once harassed into silence, now emboldened. My calm demand had cracked the surface. Lucas's citation drove the wedge. And then came the flood. Jim from the fourth row stood suddenly. "I never got notices either," he called. "You fined me $200 last month for my mailbox. Said you sent 3 warnings. Never saw a single one." Others joined. Each story another nail in her facade. A couple fined for trash bins visible for just 10 minutes. An elderly neighbor told her beige wheelchair ramp was non-compliant. Another accused for flower pots being the wrong shade. The room wasn't murmuring anymore. It was buzzing, voices layering with anger and laughter. I waited for the noise to crest, then dropped my bomb. I walked to the front, holding the battered county marker high so everyone could see. "Speaking of violations," I paused until the crowd went still. "Here's the official county boundary stake destroyed when Vivian ordered my hedges cut down. Destroying government property carries fines up to $10,000. This isn't enforcement. This is a crime." Phones whipped into the air faster than pistols in a duel. Flashes caught the glint of the embossed county seal. Shocked murmurs turned into curses. A woman in front whispered loudly, "That is a felony." The air shifted. You could feel authority draining out of her like water from a cracked vase. Vivian's fingers trembled on her clicker. "That's irrelevant." Her voice cracked an octave higher. "This isn't about markers." I swiped on my phone, projecting the photos. The destroyed marker among hedge trimmings. Vivian herself standing casually beside it with her clipboard. Workers loading branches into the truck. There was no wriggling free. She was cornered by her own arrogance. And then Lucas stepped forward again, striking the final chord. He slapped down receipts on the podium. "And while we're discussing violations, perhaps we should explain $15,000 of HOA funds paid to Green Dreams Landscaping." Oddly enough, that company never performed community maintenance, but they did perform bi-weekly services at Vivian's personal residence. Gasps poured like wind through the hall. One of her own board allies grabbed the receipts, stared, then turned pale. Someone shouted, "Audit the books." Others picked it up until it became a chant. "Audit the books. Audit the books." Vivian banged the podium with her fist. "This meeting is about Mercer's violations," she screeched. But the room was gone. It wasn't a meeting anymore, it was a riot of realization. Neighbors stood exchanging testimonies of her tyranny. A young couple yelled, "You fined us because our doormat was too cheerful." Another added, "She wrote me up for wind chimes." The room surged together, story after story hammering like waves. I leaned back, arms loosely folded, watching her shrine of a slideshow crumble behind her. Every arrow she drew toward me circled back at herself. She wanted to crown me the villain. Instead, she painted her own portrait. By the time the crowd started howling for a forensic audit and shouting motions for her removal, she was no longer the queen at her podium. She was a cornered pretender clutching a useless clicker no one cared about anymore. She had set the stage for my public humiliation. But when the curtain fell, it was her standing alone in the spotlight, stripped of every ounce of control. Thursday morning came crisp and early, and before I'd even finished my first coffee, a white van with county survey decals pulled into the street. The air had that charged feeling, like everyone knew the show was about to begin. Sure enough, within minutes, Vivian appeared, arms crossed, heels clicking against the pavement, as if stomping could hold back reality. Neighbors trickled out with folding chairs and mugs of coffee, settling on their lawns like it was some kind of live theater. Even the mailman slowed, leaning against his truck, waiting for the punchline. The surveyor emerged, a tall, wiry man with 3 decades of land disputes etched into the lines of his face. Not once did he look at Vivian as she huffed beside her clipboard. He set up the tripod, laser levels and measuring rods with slow precision, silver spikes glinting under the morning sun. Every move was methodical, deliberate, like a surgeon preparing to cut. The more Vivian hovered, craning her neck, narrating about standards and violations, the more he ignored her, brushing her aside as though she were a lawn ornament. The crowd was already entertained. For almost 2 hours, he measured, double-checked, confirmed angles, and cross-referenced with original plats. Vivian tried once, twice, 3 times to break him down. "You should measure from here," she said, jutting her heel against the ground. He gave no reply. "You know his hedges were violating setbacks." She tried again, voice rising, to which he rotated away from her without a word. It was a takedown more effective than shouting. Silence is annihilation. Finally, he waved me over but pitched his voice loud enough that every neighbor heard. His eyes narrowed on his tablet as he adjusted the display. "Mr. Mercer, I've completed my survey. The hedges in question were entirely on your property, not an inch over the line. In fact, your deed extends 2.3 feet farther than where they were planted." He pointed at the glowing overlay on his screen. "This matches original plats from 1963 and every subsequent verification." It was like he had detonated a bomb of truth. From Mrs. Chen's porch came a gasp. Someone muttered, "Checkmate." Vivian made a strangled noise in her throat as her face drained of pink. The surveyor turned slowly to her. "Also, the destroyed item recovered from your yard?" "Yes, ma'am, that is an official county boundary marker installed in 1984. These are protected under state law. Damaging one is a criminal offense." The collective intake of breath from the crowd was followed by an immediate eruption of whispers and exclamations. Phones came out, people typing frantically. Vivian wavered, her clipboard trembling, mascara already starting to smudge. But the great man was not finished. He crouched, pulled a rolled survey map from a metal tube and laid it flat on a folding table he'd brought. His pointer tapped Vivian's property. "Interesting situation here. Ma'am, are you aware that your driveway encroaches 2.1 feet into your neighbor's land?" The neighbor in question nearly spilled his coffee. His head jerked up, eyes flashing. "What? You mean that concrete slab is on my property?" "Correct," the surveyor said simply. "Furthermore, your rear fence sits 3 feet beyond your actual boundary line into another neighbor's property. Your shed violates setback by 4 feet. And the tree cut last year without permit. That was city property, carrying roughly $12,000 in damages." Vivian staggered. It looked like each point landed like a physical blow. She sputtered words, half screams that didn't form sentences. The crowd leaned closer like spectators at a gladiator match watching the emperor fall. Her power had always been in her ability to claim rules nobody questioned. But now, in broad daylight and witnessed by 40 neighbors, official record unraveled her entire empire into chaos. "Would you like me to call the sheriff now, or will you?" the surveyor asked politely, folding his map. A hush fell. Vivian's lip trembled. No words came. The man packed his gear with clinical efficiency, turning once more to me. He pulled the bent marker stake from his kit. "Mr. Mercer, considering hedges destroyed on private property, plus value lost on established growth, I'd estimate damages around 15,000. Add destroyed government property, you now have strong grounds for both civil and criminal action. My full report will be filed in 48 hours with the county, admissible in any court proceeding." Neighbors erupted into applause. Actual applause, clapping for facts. Somebody shouted, "Get her audited." Lucas scribbled notes in his folder, whispering, "This is artillery." Vivian tried to rally, "This is harassment. I'll sue." But her voice fell flat. For the first time in years, nobody listened. She had no clicker, no slides, no dominance, only shame under sunlight. By the time the crowd dispersed, people were already discussing walls, permits, and elections. And that afternoon, while Vivian sulked indoors, I sat at my desk filling out a permit application for a 6-foot cinder block wall. Purpose, boundary protection, and neighborhood beautification through public art. Lucas had shown me the ordinance. Once designated public art, HOA had zero power over it. This time, Vivian wouldn't destroy one more leaf. This time, I would build something she couldn't erase. She demolished my hedges and thought she'd won. What she didn't realize was she'd just set the foundation for something far more permanent, a monument not of greenery but of stone and art. Something that would loom in front of her house every day, reminding her she had finally met her match. The wall rose faster than anyone expected. By the time the inspector signed off every permit with board professionalism, and the police walked away shaking their heads at Vivian's theatrical complaints, 3 pallets of cinder blocks had already been lowered into my driveway. The construction crew worked with the focus of men who had seen 1,000 stubborn homeowners, but never one quite like Vivian pacing in her slippers, recording every scrape of mortar, as if documenting a war crime. She screamed about noise, She screamed about aesthetics. She screamed about growing up in a community of standards. The crew kept working. Neighbors kept gathering, some handing me bottles of water or snacks in obvious solidarity, pointedly ignoring her red-faced accusations. By dusk, the 6-foot structure stood like a fortress, perfectly legal, looming gray and strong as though it had always belonged there. It cast a shadow over her lawn that seemed symbolic, and when her online rant livestream accidentally caught her muttering, "I cut those hedges to teach him a lesson. I should have cut them lower." Lucas screen recorded it instantly. In less than an hour, her own words were passing through neighborhood group chats like wildfire, laying out her malice in her own voice. Within days, the mosaic artist arrived. Tarps covered the blank cinder canvas while volunteers helped carry boxes of colored tiles into my garage. Each shard had a history. Cracked pool sign blues Vivian once demanded removed. Chipped green gnome fragments she had fined residents for displaying. Hints of terracotta from flower pots she had called non-compliant. Piece by piece, the supplies piled up into something that already looked like memory, being weaponized into permanence. Vivian didn't know what was coming, though she sensed it, rushing door to door with her clipboard, begging for signatures to fund legal battles against the illegal wall. Doors closed on her. Phones filmed her desperation. You could feel power slipping like sand through her clenched fists. And when Friday night's emergency HOA meeting arrived, it ended with her open disbelief at 93 hands raised in no confidence against her, minutes later replaced with a cascade of motions: forensic audit, suspension of fines, a temporary board. She left the building with the sweaty, disheveled face of someone who still thought she was the queen, but realized with tears spilling in the hallway that her kingdom had publicly dissolved. 1 week later, the unveiling. Streaks of morning sunlight hit the tarps that veiled the mosaic pressed across the wall. Neighbors shoulder to shoulder murmuring, phones out. Even Vivian stood in the back disguised by sunglasses too big for her face, thinking her presence hidden. I tugged one corner of the tarp loose with slow deliberation, then the other, and with a single long pull the canvas flopped away. Gasps detonated. It wasn't abstract or safe. It was a photorealistic punch in ceramic. Vivian herself mid-scowl, a chainsaw in hand, mirrored in jagged reds and smoky grays. Around her stretched scenes of ballots, crumbling fences, sawdust, and a timeline of ruin. At the bottom, spelled in sharp white fragments, "Power corrupts but art endures, 2024. People pointed, laughed, clapped, chanted. Children asked loud questions mothers nervously tried to hush. Social media already exploded as phones live-streamed the piece. A local arts committee official cleared his throat and declared, "This qualifies without question for public art designation. Mr. Mercer, expect your grant in 5 business days." With that, the wall was permanent, city protected, legally invulnerable. Neighbors cheered louder. Vivian let out a strangled cry that sounded half scream, half sob, then staggered toward her house. She tried threats, lawsuits, defamation, harassment, but every word was drowned by laughter, selfies, and hashtags blooming. O'Karen Wall Justice in Tiles. The weeks that followed were a cultural avalanche Vivian couldn't outpace. A for sale sign appeared in her yard, then lingered while her house sat unwanted. Attached forever to the image across the street, auditors revealed $43,000 siphoned illegally into personal expenses. The district attorney announced charges: embezzlement, fraud, destruction of government property, falsified violation reports. Her plea bargain stripped her of what little remained: probation, mandatory restitution, community service planting flowers beneath the wall she hated most, and a permanent ban from HOA boards. Meanwhile, the wall grew famous. Food trucks rolled up on weekends. Local news shot segments of families posing under the ceramic glare. Critics in nearby cities praised it as revenge architecture and narrative art with teeth. My nursery saw record sales as people introduced themselves by saying, "You're the wall guy, right?" The city turned the street corner into a tiny park with benches and a plaque about artistic expression and property rights. Tourists posed. Neighbors laughed for the first time in years, marveling at stories they were safe enough to tell now. And Vivian? She packed boxes in silence, moving into an apartment in some HOA-less complex, her name muttered only as cautionary tale. Now seasons pass and hedges regrow along the wall's base, lush and deep. Never threatened by her scissors again, the mosaic weathers into permanence, muted by rain but gleaming under sun, her face frozen mid-snarl telling a story she never wished told but could never erase. Sometimes in the mornings I water the new growth, glance up at her expression captured forever in glass and clay, and feel something heavier than triumph. Maybe relief, maybe peace. For 7 years those hedges had marked my pride. For 12 minutes she thought she could erase them with chainsaws and arrogance. But what she actually did was hand me a mirror, a protected wall no ordinance could touch. And that wall speaks louder than hedges ever could. Power crumbles. Paper trails burn through dictatorships of suburbia. But art endures.